Hello everybody. Yes, we do not make rules here. Well, we can make rules here, but that's not the purpose for today. We're talking about characters resting in a Dungeons & Dragons adventure. I'm specifically targeting the Lost Mine of Phandelver because I get a lot of questions around this particular topic. So therefore it made a lot of sense to actually talk about the topic for today. How's it going, Mr. Xander? And hi Fender, how's it going? All right, so I'm just waiting. Oh my God. I have to watch an ad. Would you like to know that I actually have to sit here and watch an ad for, it looks like 12 seconds. 12-second ad. How did that happen? Okay, I don't want to save anything. All right, now that that's gone, you'll let me know if the sound or the video is messed up and I'll do my best to fix that. Okay, all right, so I'm going to put the start time for this video down in the description for those of you who want to skip past all of my rambling and my setup and so forth and explanation. That'll certainly, that'll happen. I usually do that when YouTube publishes the video as a high definition version or publishes it as a standard version if they never get around to the high definition version, which tends to be happening recently. Anyway, the live stream will stay public until I do my edited version. The edited version will have the front and the back trimmed off, which means all the Q&A and questions and answers, preamble will be gone, and it's a lot shorter. So once that edited version goes public, that means the live stream goes unlisted, which means you need to be subscribed, hit the bell button, turn on notifications to be able to actually get access to the live stream if you want it. Otherwise, being a patron, you always get the live stream access because I make sure they're on the page for you. Okay, it is a very hot day in my office, so I'm probably going to prattle through this very, very quickly in an attempt to try to escape as fast as I can. It's summer in New Zealand, and my office is small, and I'm sweltering. Okay, now if you haven't been in my live streams before, normally what I do is I present everything first, using my notes, and I have about 4 pages of notes. I know that seems like an awful lot. 4 pages of notes, and once I've done that, we'll go back to the webcam and we'll do a Q&A, feedback. You can ask questions about anything you like. It doesn't have to be about the topic for today, okay? All right, so grab a drink, settle back, get ready. We are going to crack on in and do this, and hopefully I will cover all the things that people have been asking me for quite some time. Sound is working fine. We'll get rid of the earplugs, don't need that. I'm gonna have a drink of water. All right, I hope you've got your drink and your food already because we are into it now. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, because I always do talk about Dungeons & Dragons. The topic for today is characters resting in the Lost Mine of Phandelver. This is a question that has been roaming around for some time. I would like to point out that this particular video is a Dungeon Master guide. It is not really suited as a player guide. I don't think it will hurt a lot of players by watching some aspects of it, but because I have no intentions of telling you when there is a spoiler, frankly there will be spoilers in here, so I would not hang around. If you're a Dungeon Master, you're in the right place. If you're a player, go and watch one of my other videos rather than this particular one until you have finished playing through the adventure. That would be my advice to you. A common question, or common questions should I say, I get from Dungeon Masters about player characters taking a short rest and a long rest, and it's like where and when and every aspect and what are the consequences. So we're going to try to unpack all of that today in this video. So when can characters take a rest, whether that be a short rest or a long rest? When can they do that? The answer to that is there's actually multiple answers. There isn't one answer. The first thing I would say is characters can actually take a rest anytime. They can take a long rest, a short rest, anytime. It's a player choice, okay? It's not a Dungeon Master choice, really. This is actually something the players are doing with their characters. But there might be consequences for taking a short rest or a long rest. And that's the thing you've got to remember as a Dungeon Master, and if you're a player, you probably want to be remembering that as well. But I would say this is the thing you need to follow up with as a Dungeon Master. That's the first aspect. They can do it anytime they like. Now, if you have a look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Dungeon Master's Guide states that 1 long rest and 2 short rests for every 6 to 8 combat encounters in your adventuring day. This is I guess, something that's been roaming around on the internet for some time. A lot of people are aware of it. A lot of people do not know anything about it. I can totally understand why they don't know anything about it. But the reality is, even though the Dungeon Master's Guide states that 1 long rest and 2 short rests for every 6 to 8 combat encounters in your adventuring day, that doesn't mean that translates into this is the thing you want to do in your game. Okay, I just want to make that clear. I recommend ignoring the Dungeon Master Guide. Okay, why? Very few Dungeon Masters apply the adventuring day in their game or with their groups. And in fact, most groups are taking a long rest after having 1 to 3 combat encounters, including the designers. I would like to point out the designers do not use the adventuring day as listed in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And the reason they don't use this is because they don't measure and equate everything around experience points. They're all using milestones, so that has absolutely nothing to do with the way you would calculate 6 to 8 combat encounters and the adventuring day. So forget about that stuff, would be my advice to you. It is just my advice. You do not need to listen to me. I am sure there is somebody out there who will say, actually, Fred, I do that in my adventures and with my group. I don't know what you're talking about. Let's get real. We are dealing with the Lost Mine of Phandelver. The majority of people are beginner dungeon masters or getting back into Dungeons and Dragons or beginner players. And as a result of that, they're not playing at this high level of play to these strict rules. That's my first thing I want to say. Okay, so we've answered the question, and that is the characters can take a rest whenever they like, but there's going to be a consequence. So where can the characters take a rest, whether that be a short rest or a long rest? Where can they do that safely without having to worry about something trying to eat them or attack them or kill them? And there are about 5 different locations, general locations that I would say are going to work for you. I want to go over each one of them separately and spell out all the things you might have to hopefully have questions around. The first one is Phandelver. The town of Phandelver is probably a really good place to take a short rest or a long rest. The best place to do that would be the Stonehill Inn. And I've done a video about the Stonehill Inn. You're welcome to go and check it out. That would be the smart place to go and take a short rest or a long rest. Now there are other locations within Phandelver. You could also take short and long rests, but that depends on how the players are interacting with the NPCs in that location. So there is some flexibility around this. Okay. What about another location? Say if they go out of the Phandelver region. Let's say they're closer to Waterdeep. Now that city is quite large. I would say something like the Yawning Portal would be a pretty good place to go and check out as a place of rest. There are many inns in Waterdeep, so you could use many of those without any significant problem, and you would be pretty safe as a player or a player character. There are, in fact, other locations very similar to Waterdeep, and that is Neverwinter. Now, this is where the adventure essentially starts. Now, the city of Neverwinter has an inn called the Shining Serpent Inn. This would be my suggestion to you. Use this location as a place of rest. That's a pretty safe location. Yet again, there are many inns and taverns that they could stay at and be safe within Neverwinter. Okay, so what if they're going a bit further south for some other reason, for whatever reason, they've decided to travel further south and they're closer to something like Baldur's Gate. Now, the city of Baldur's Gate has a place called the Blade and Stars. I would say that's probably the safest place to go. There are, yet again, many different inns and taverns in this location. The only problem with Baldur's Gate is it's a much nastier and more dangerous location. Therefore, some of these places are probably not good to rest at. I'm not going to go into them. I'm just going to give you the ones that are going to be useful to you in terms of what your players might want to try to do. And I'm trying to give you a sample so you know what to tell them where they could stay. Okay, you don't have to research the whole lot. Okay, so what about that druid? Okay, anywhere that Redolf, the druid, in the Ruins of Thunder Tree is staying is probably a safe location to be. So follow the druid, stay with him. Your characters are probably going to be safe and they can take that short and long rest. Right, what about if they are in between adventures, they can't get back to a main town or city and they're nowhere near the druid, where else could they stay? Well, the reality is that it could be any campsite that is hidden from wandering monsters and not a location that has hostile creatures around it. So they have to be selective. What sort of skill would you use for this? If they are, selecting a location to camp out, I would use the survival skill. Go and use that because that'll probably help you determine where they find or how good their campsite is. If you want to roll dice, you do not have to roll dice for them to actually find a campsite. All they need to do is say, I want a campsite that has a good view or is a safe location, and that might be a cave that's empty. It might be on top of a hill so they have a good view. There are lots of different ways of doing this, but as long as it's away from the main dungeon that they have been exploring, they're probably going to be all right. Now, how far away is going to be up to you. I would say a good distance would be the smart way to go about doing things. Okay, if the players select a poor area or location to rest, I want you to consider using wandering monsters. Have a wandering monster come into their campsite or their rest location to disturb their short rest and long rest. Now, this is a strategy that has been used throughout all of the Dungeons and Dragons versions. Okay, not all of the locations within the Lost Mine of Phandelver have wandering monsters, but there are wandering monster charts in the book that you could use. You could make your own up. I've already done a video on wandering monsters, so you're welcome to go and check that video out. And I talked with Wally Dem in detail about wandering monsters, and that's probably a good place to go and have a look if you are interested in more information. So what about the locations that you might have problems with? Locations that still have hostile or dangerous monsters are likely to be the following, and I have 8 locations that I want to talk about, and I'll give you my reasons why, and then you can make your decision about whether you believe me or not. Okay, so the first one, we'll start off with Cragmore Hideout. This is a medium-sized dungeon or cave complex. There is plenty of noise in this location, so that means that making noise is not a big issue. The problem is, because there are so few rooms or cavities or chambers in this location, the chances are that somebody is going to wander into a location and notice that somebody's been killed or is missing, and so they might discover the party resting, whether that be a long rest or a short rest. So I would say it's probably not sensible to have them resting in this location if there are still goblins hanging around. If there's goblins there, it's probably not a safe place to be. And they're going to have to move further away from the Cragmore Hideout and to take that rest and do so. Otherwise, hostile creatures are probably going to find them. Okay, number 2, that is Cragmore Castle. Now, the problem with Cragmore Castle is it's a bit bigger. The complex is quite tightly packed. The number of creatures and monsters in the rooms are tightly packed. It's going to be very difficult to even explore this location without having the entire castle coming down on their head, let alone trying to rest in a location like this unless you have cleared it out completely. So I don't believe this is a good place to rest. They need to be resting away from the castle, probably in the forest or the bushes, a good distance from that castle, because there's actually a patrol that's moving around that could wind up bumping into them. So, and they're orcs. I would suggest being very careful with this and don't have them rest here. Not the right place to do it. Okay, number 3, the Red Brand Hideout. This is a medium-sized complex. It doesn't have a lot of noise taking place in it. Most of the rooms are relatively well tightly packed, but not completely. The only problem is this is a living space. Now, when you think about your own home, you move from room to room quite often. You probably don't stay in one location for just the entire hour. You're moving back and forth from the toilet to the living room to the kitchen and to your bedroom to have a nap, whatever it might be. In all likelihood, you're going to be discovered if you try to rest here. So this is a bad place to rest as far as I'm concerned, unless it's been cleared out. And the other thing is you also have red brands that would be moving in and out of the hideout who aren't necessarily, they might be in town and they're coming back to the hideout to feed or sleep or do something else. Okay? All right. Number 4 is Agatha's Lair. This is Coneyberry. Literally impossible. There's no chance that the players are going to be able to stay out of the way of the Banshee. And the Banshee is really not a combat encounter. The Banshee is not designed to be so. Therefore, they're not going to be killing no Banshee. The Banshee is just going to disappear and come back and hassle them later on if they hang around. And they are in a location that is actually quite wild. So that means there's potentially wild animals that will come across them, not just the Banshee. So Agatha's Lair, a very foolish place to try and take a short rest or a long rest. Okay, number 5. This is the Old Owl Well. This is a very small open ruin. Okay, and because of that, and because there's a tent set up, and there's quite a few undead in this location, and there's a wizard, that means they're probably not going to be able to rest here unless they have resolved the issue, okay, with harm and cost. If they haven't resolved the issue with harm and cost, resting here won't work. But if they're mates, that would be different. They probably could rest here because guess what? That wizard has control over the undead in this location. Otherwise, not a good place to camp. All right, and it's way too open. Next, we have number 6. This is Wyventor. This is a very small cave. It's full of orcs and it's got an ogre in it. And there's no way you could possibly hope to camp and rest here. There's just nowhere to do it because it is so small. So not a good option at all. So move away from the cave. The players really need to move their characters quite a good distance away to make sure they aren't noticed by any orcs that might be roaming around the outside of the cave opening. All right, number 7. This is the ruins of Thunder Tree. It is heavily populated. Okay, there are lots of things. You've got plant creatures, you've got zombies, you've got the cult, and you've got a dragon of all things. And they're all roaming around. You can't really take a short rest or a long rest in this location. My advice to you is if the players want to take a long rest or a short rest, they really need to move away from this location. You do not need to bombard them with a really difficult combat. All you need to do is break that short rest to give them the message that this is not the place to rest. That's my advice to you. Okay. Now, because the druid is here, there is still an opportunity to meet up with the druid and for the druid to take them to a safer location further away from the ruins of Thunder Tree where they could rest and take a short rest or a long rest and do so safely, which of course is the smart thing to do. Last one. This is number 8. This is Wave Echo Cave, the main location, the climax, and this place is infested with undead. There are lots of cavities, lots of chambers, lots of passageways, but that does not mean that it's a good place to camp out or rest. Now, there is actually rules around how wandering monsters work in this location already. But my advice to you is don't present Wave Echo Cave as a location for taking a rest. I think you've got to start giving them the idea that I need to actually select a safer location. And I will do a video in the future for players on how to select a campsite that is actually going to be safe. This is not the video for that. This is for the Dungeon Master. So this is not a safe place to do any of that sort of thing. And monsters don't necessarily stay in one location unless the Dungeon Master deems that to be the case. Okay, there are consequences for characters resting as long as there are hostile creatures still in a dungeon area, and I've already explained my rationale behind that. Now, why would that be the case? Now, the reason is they're going to be moving around. They will notice dead bodies. They will notice members that should be there who are no longer there. And then, of course, they've got to go and track them down. They will probably go and report to their boss first. And then they go into high alert. So that's one of the consequences of a character resting in the middle of trying to complete a dungeon location. So what I want to do is I want to give you sort of a bit more meat and potatoes with regard to this adventure. So here are a few ways consequences can be applied to resting characters in your adventure. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. I'm just saying here are 3 ways you could do it, and it's up to you to decide what you think is appropriate for your group, because it does depend on the players in the group, not the Dungeon Master, as far as I'm concerned anyway. So the first one is the remaining monsters in the lair will be prepared for future infiltrating adventurers, and as a result of that they will set up traps or have an ambush set up ready to go, so that when they come back, since they didn't eliminate all of the monsters or creatures in that location or deal with them, they don't have to kill them, they might just talk to them, they will have an ambush ready to go. Now this is suitable, I think, for intermediate and experienced players. This is an approach that's normally used by intermediate to experienced dungeon masters, and I would apply it to players in the same way. The second option is a bit harder. The Dungeon Master decides they will replace killed or missing monsters with new reinforcements, provided there are reinforcements to reinforce the location, and then they have them set up traps and an ambush waiting for the players' characters to come back. Now this is more suitable for an experienced group. Experienced players will understand this concept. It's probably not going to be the right move for a group of beginners, okay? And I know people believe that, or some people believe, that you need to present the right model and habits from the very get-go, but I think that you really need to get them familiar with the game before you start turning up the difficulty. And this is essentially what it's doing. And it doesn't always make sense to replace all the monsters anyway. Some locations would not have reinforcements, and so you would fall back on approach number 1 rather than approach number 2. Okay, approach number 3 is the remaining monsters in the dungeon remain static until the player's characters return. And it's like a saved video game. That means that there are no reinforcements. That doesn't mean that they have set up traps, and they don't have ambushes, and they're not prepared for the player's characters to come back into the dungeon location. This is better for beginners, in my opinion. You don't have to keep doing this the whole way through the entire adventure. I think you will find that once they get a few levels behind them, you can probably shift to approach number 1. But again, you have to make that decision based on the makeup of your group of players who are playing at the table. Okay, 3 specific questions and consequences that might take place as a result of short resting and long resting in the Lost Mine of Phandelver. I'm going to answer these questions so I don't have to keep answering them because it's getting old. The first one is, resting without saving Sildar Hallwinter first in the Cragmore hideout will likely result in the man being killed and eaten by goblins. That's probably what's going to happen. Yimmick is probably going to put him to the sword or to the knife, and they're going to roast him in the goblin den. Seems terrible and horrible, but it is a consequence of not getting to Sildar first. Alright, and I know the players won't necessarily know that Sildar is in that location, but if they have a rough time at the very beginning of the cave and they don't get to Sildar, Sildar is probably dead. You don't have to do it this way, I'm just suggesting these are probably natural consequences of resting. Okay, next one. I have to say, whoops, wrong one. Resting without saving Gundren Rockseeker first. If you don't save Gundren Rockseeker first in the Cragmore Castle, it will likely lead to the dwarf being tortured and the time frame for torture being sped up if they're already in the process of doing that or they haven't started it. And then he'll get killed, he'll get eaten by goblins and replaced by a doppelganger, since there's a doppelganger there. And that would be anticipation of somebody trying to track down Gundren Rockseeker, because I'm sure that they will assume that that could possibly happen. And it would be, of course, entirely useful to the Cragmore tribe to have Gundren Rockseeker show up in Phandelver and continue on as if everything had pretty much been the same and nothing had changed, even though he is dead. That would be a natural consequence of Gundren not being rescued. Okay, the last one. Resting without saving Nundro Rockseeker. That's the last brother that Gundren has that is still alive. If you don't rescue Nundro first in Wave Echo Cave, I would say it's likely that it's going to mean that the dwarf is going to get tortured. The time frame will be sped up. He'll get killed, put to the sword, and then eaten by giant spiders, because Nesna has giant spiders, and then replaced by a doppelganger for anybody who comes around this particular location or claim and is assuming that the rock seekers are still laying claim to this particular area. And there is a doppelganger in this location, so as a dungeon master you could do it. That would be a natural consequence of trying to rest in that location, which means, because the cave location is so large and they will probably have to rest, short or long, that Nundro will never survive the process, and you're going to wind up Nundro being a doppelganger. I've already done a video on doppelgangers in the Lost Mine of Phandelver, so you're welcome to go and check that out. It is still up to you as a dungeon master. You do not need to do things the way I have suggested. I am hoping this has answered all the questions that you had about resting in the Lost Mine of Phandelver for player characters. If it has, fantastic. I have a series of videos on the Lost Mine of Phandelver for the Dungeon Master, which will help you fill out your characters and do a lot of different things. And you're welcome to go and check those out. Otherwise, if you're not into that sort of thing, I have hundreds of videos for players and Dungeon Masters on every aspect of the game of Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can do that through my Patreon page, the affiliate Amazon links down in my descriptions of my videos, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos, that's fine too. Make sure to share, like and subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. I'm not gone. Okay, we're coming back. We're going to answer some questions, because I know there are people with a lot of questions, and I am intending to answer as many as I can. So my suggestion to people, I'm going to go hashtag question, since there's about 30 people in here. I didn't expect that. Hashtag question. Whoops. Please. Now, a lot of what I've talked about can be applied to any Dungeons & Dragons adventure, not just the Lost Mine of Phandelver, for those of you who are wondering, okay? These are approaches and strategies that a lot of Dungeon Masters use in their game, and it's really up to you whether you decide this is the right way or the wrong way for you, okay? All right, so if you have questions or feedback, by all means, feel free to share them. I'm just getting comfortable and getting some water into me, and then we will zap on through here, have a look at the chat, and discuss things a little bit more. And I am happy to answer whatever question you have. It doesn't have to be about the Lost Mine of Phandelver. All right. Okay, so my eyes aren't too bad, so we'll use the glasses for now. Okay, you got a question here, Mr. Xander. What wisdom have you for tonight? Well, I'm hoping the wisdom I have is that player characters should not rest in dungeons, and they should go and find a different location to camp out to take that short or long rest. I have been running through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage and re-educating my home group, who are all experienced players, about not resting in dungeons, no matter how big or long they are, that it is safer to go somewhere else. So, as I said, it can be applied to any adventure. What else you got here? 2 gold for a night at an inn. That's outrageous. Well, here's the thing. That is for a particular type of inn. The price on an inn can change. And there's no reason why the players could not just set up camp on the outskirts of Phandelver. That would still be a relatively safe location. This is actually information I've put into a different video. I don't really want to talk about it here because it's going to get released pretty shortly. That's designed for players rather than dungeon masters, about how to select a campsite, which I kind of talked about already. And somebody asked me, how do I figure out, what's a good place to camp? So that question's going to be answered. That means when it gets released as a dungeon master, throw that towards your players, and hopefully that will help educate them on how to actually play the game a little bit better, so they don't have to worry about those consequences. My feeling is, when it comes to resting in Dungeons and Dragons, is if the players find a good place to rest and that it's safe and there really is no good reason why they would be disrupted, that if they can do that, they could take a long rest after every battle. Does that mean that the resource management that you might be trying to apply to your game might get thrown out? Well, yes, it would. But the thing is that the players are doing the right thing. And you don't want to punish the players for doing the smart and right thing. And the smart and right thing is to take a rest after every battle if you can, particularly if at low level. And Lost Mine of Phandelver is a low level adventure. Once you get to level 5, it's a little bit different. High level play, and I've been in high level play games, so I've gone from level 1 to level 20, and high level play, the players don't want to rest all the time because their resources usually don't get taxed that badly. They can deal with stuff, they really can. And they have synergies which help with that. Okay, negative space. How's it going, negative space? If we stay in the inn, that is way too much work for the random encounter to get to us. Well, that's the thing. The whole point of the inn and staying in the inn is so that you don't have to deal with the random. Now, I would like to point out that a random encounter is not always combat. And a random encounter is not the same thing as a wandering monster. A wandering monster is usually a very small selection of potential creatures that are patrolling or roaming around in a location. Whereas a random encounter is far more random in nature than a wandering monster. Okay, wandering monsters are usually on timers, whereas a random encounter can be of any nature, whether it be combat or something else, and it can be thrown in anywhere you need to sort of spice things up. And I know that a lot of people use the random encounter concept and the wandering monster concept interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable when you start looking at them and breaking them down. Okay. I'm going to be able to get out of this live chat real quick, I can see. Hi, Nick. How's it going? Yes, negative space is talking about the adventuring day. The adventuring day is a nice dream, but the problem is there is no reason for a player to follow it. Yep. And maybe it should be more like a guide for DMs to throw X encounters at the players before they take a rest. The other thing you got to remember, and I've got a video coming out on the adventuring day, which I wish I had shot and did a better job of. But the adventuring day does not take into consideration things like exploration, traps, hazards that might have depleted resources. It doesn't take into consideration things like just a social interaction where the players either gain an advantage or extra resources or lose resources as a result of that interaction. They might have to bribe guards. That means they lost gold because they had to pay some money. So the adventuring day does not take everything into account. So that's why I'm saying don't get hooked up into the adventuring day too much. There are people who use it and they swear by it, but the vast majority of people do not use it. And there's a good reason. Okay. Before they can finish a long rest. Yeah. Okay, Nick, what do you got here? You're talking about what negative space is talking about. I've always assumed the adventuring day is a guide for the DM. It's an assumption that the amount of encounters per day is an appropriate amount for a party. So the adventuring day and the calculation for it is based on challenge rating and experience points. It's very much tied to that. As a result of that, has anybody noticed challenge rating is not a very good, accurate indicator of how difficult something is? Because the reality is that maths cannot take into consideration every aspect of the game. And I would much prefer my group of players to take a long rest at the end of every combat that they have and do it in a safe location, because that's the smart thing to do. What would I do in terms of the game? I would still allow there to be easy, medium, and extremely hard combats. I will mix them up. And there's no reason why you can't make them more difficult. But we are talking about the Lost Mine of Phandelver, which is usually played by beginners or people getting back into the hobby. So you don't need to start out like that. You can do that if you really want to, but you don't have to do it that way. Oh, I'm not saying that name. No. How's it going, Saves? How's it going, C Saves? How to not get first level TPK by goblins. Yeah, well, that's the reality is that I've already done a video on the goblin ambush, which if you're going to have a TPK, it's probably going to be the first combat that you have. And my suggestion is go and check out that particular video, because I give you a whole lot of advice around it, and I actually show you what's likely to take place. So yes, I don't mind character death, but I don't really want character death for new players, and I don't want to necessarily avoid the TPK, but I don't want to orchestrate it either, if that makes sense. Hi, how's it going, F Hubba? Well, Fred, you're late, but that's all right, you're here. That's the main thing. Hi, Kevin. Was this it? Well, no, Kevin, did I not give you enough? Did I not provide enough information on resting for characters in the Lost Mine of Phandelver? Tell me, what other questions did I need to answer? Was there something else you were looking for? Did I not hit all the marks? If I didn't hit all the marks, let me know now. Okay, I thought I was going to get away, but it looks like there are people pumping stuff in here. I'm going faster. Hi, Aaron, how's it going? How many times have you run Lost Mine of Phandelver? I'm about to start running it the third time. This time I am mixing in Dragon of Ice by a Peak. Okay, I've run it about 1.5 times. I've had to break it down for other Dungeon Masters, so I kind of feel like I've run it more than 1.5 times. I've run it 1.5 times for players, but then I've had to sort of dissect it for Dungeon Masters. I'm about to run it again. Would you believe it? I managed to convince people at work to let me run Dungeons and Dragons at work. That was the biggest scam under the sun, if you asked me. But I know that the people there will benefit from it, and I will get an opportunity to run it again and maybe do things a little bit differently. And there's always an opportunity to try and do things a little bit differently. And I will probably include Dragon of Ice by a Peak, provided that I don't get shut down after doing it for the very first time at work. What do you got here, Fred? The adventuring day is controlled by the DM, not the players. No, actually, Fred, it's not. I know, Fred Hubby, I know you're saying the adventuring day, but it's not. If you were to try to control it, you're essentially putting your adventure on a rail. That's a rail road, okay? You do not have control over that. Not completely. The reality is the players have control over that. And as a Dungeon Master, if you can accept that as a reality, then you will understand that 6 to 8 combats and then taking a long rest is probably not feasible, okay? And that you need to readjust it. Now, the adventuring day is a product of Wizards of the Coast. It never existed before, okay? It was never a thing. It is a thing that has been created after Dungeons and Dragons went from TSR to Wizards of the Coast. And then we have the discussions about the adventuring day and calculating numbers of combat encounters before people rest. And it's a nonsense. And I'm going to stick to my guns on that one. Sorry. Mike bro, how's it going? Hi Fred. Thanks for putting together another great live stream. You're welcome. Using a lot of your Lost Mine of Phandelver content in Ice by a Peak to get lots out of the region. Great stuff. Yes, you can reuse a lot of the NPCs that I did for the Lost Mine of Phandelver and the Dragon of Ice by a Peak. And I did recently do a video on, how to build and expand the NPCs for Dragon of Ice by a Peak. And I also did a video with Bob World Builder on that topic as well. And you'll probably find that useful. Okay, Kevin Bell has got a question. Have you ever played Night Below? It was similar problems with lengthy stays underground. I don't think I played it for long. If I did play it, I didn't play it for long. It does sound familiar, but I can't quite remember. The reality is that, a video game is not the same as a role-play game. And the Adventuring Day is really trying to turn the role-play game into a video game. That's really what it's trying to do. So I just want to make it clear that Dungeons and Dragons it's not a video game unless you're actually playing the online Dungeons and Dragons video game. The tabletop game is a different animal. Okay, what do you got here, Fred? I have a laminated page that I use to track game time. I'm marking off, what's that? Rests. Okay, you've got a whole lot of shortenings here. Look, I'm sure that there are people who have made it work, but I can assure you, as a player, I would not play in a game like that, and I would not run that as a dungeon master. And the vast majority of the community do not run the game like that. I did a poll recently, and I proved that point. So I don't want to really hash it out. The Adventuring Day for me is frankly a complete waste of your time. I wouldn't even go near it. Okay? All right. Fred Daniel, what do you got here? Lots of great advice, Fred. To put it mildly, I have found resting is frequently a contentious issue. It is always a contentious issue and a source of conflict among players and between players and the dungeon master. Yes, it is absolutely. You're absolutely right. You're right that you're going to get contention between players about when to rest, and between the players and the dungeon masters and how it should be done. And I think if you think about how Dungeons and Dragons used to be played, so this is my advice to you, Fred Daniel. My advice to you is to view the concept of the players resting as this. If it is just exploration and using up resources, if they are doing the right thing, it's fine. When it comes to the players disagreeing about when they're going to rest, that's a player thing. They have to come to an agreement on it, where to do it and when to do it. Okay? As a dungeon master, there's nothing stopping you from saying, and I know a lot of people will get upset with me, from saying, look, I'm the dungeon master, I'm the referee, I deal with rules. But as a dungeon master, you can also give them advice. You can say, look, the likelihood of being able to rest in a dungeon location that still potentially has danger in it is probably not going to mean you're going to get an undisturbed short rest or long rest. As a dungeon master, you can actually tell people that. It's not a secret. Don't make it a secret. Okay? It is not the dungeon master against the player. Okay? You have plenty of monsters that you can use later on. Don't worry about that sort of stuff. Okay? So have that discussion. And then things like, look, if you're going to camp, you probably need to camp far enough away that nothing is going to disturb you, and you need to select a campsite that makes sense. And by far the safest place to rest is always going to be an inn, because There's security around that. There's a building, there's a structure. Okay? Those are conversations as a dungeon master you can have with the players, and that may in fact change the view of the players who are arguing amongst themselves about where and when to do that. Now, when it comes to arguing between the players and the dungeon master, if you are a dungeon master and you have set in your mind that resting has to work a particular way, no advice I give you is going to work, because you won't listen to me. Okay? You don't have to listen to me. I'm just a guy on YouTube. Okay? I just give you options. That's it. And I give you my advice based on my experience. But if your experience is different, you won't care. So if there is conflict between the players and the dungeon master, because the dungeon master feels that short resting and long resting must work a particular way, there's nothing, no advice I can ever give you that will ever help. And I'm not really inclined to care too much about dealing with that situation. But if you are a dungeon master who can understand and realize that players actually make the choice when their characters rest, whether they are successful or not is beside the point. When they rest and where they rest, then you're actually going to be in a much better place. Okay? I've always come to the conclusion, once you get past the beginner phase, once you get past players being beginners, and you become, beyond the intermediate level and you get into the experienced level, which doesn't take that long, with my group, I have this approach. If they decide to take a long rest after every combat, I will just make the combats harder. I'm fine with making the combats deadly for everything they ever face, if that's really where we need to go. I'm happy with that. I will pick key locations. So if there's a dungeon, Clark in Cragmore Hideout, if I want that to be a tough fight, and I know they have all their resources because they took a short rest, then I will have Clark prepared for the players to enter, and I will make sure there are reinforcements to help him, and I'll make it a tough fight for them if they are experienced players. I have an experienced group going through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. I have the choice as a dungeon master to decide when I want to give them a tough fight, where it really matters. Does it matter here whether they rest or not? And if they do take a rest, am I prepared with something that will make their life more complicated? And I can do that. And it doesn't always have to be about killing the enemy. If you put in objectives, that changes things again. And monsters can run away to fight again. That's another way of doing things. Okay, all right. Okay, I need another drink of water and then I will answer the next question. I see Nick has got a question there. All right, here we go. Nick, question. Please, hey Fred, do you ever find yourself pulling your punches with wandering monsters, or do you punish the players when they take a rest unprepared? Okay, first off, I don't consider it punishing. Okay? First off, I don't consider it punishing. Here's the thing. I don't have an issue with character death. I don't really want TPKs in my group. And again, I've told people my philosophy about being a dungeon master and character death. I don't believe, for me, I make the choice about whether the person continues to play the character, whether they die or not. If they can't get the character back in the game themselves through magic or whatever means, and they need to approach me to make that happen, then I will build in a consequence or a complication and they continue to play the game. I don't make that choice. Okay? I know some dungeon masters view that very differently. Do you know, I've heard this, people say, but when you do that sort of thing, you make death meaningless. Rubbish. There are a number of people who I have said this to, and they've said, no, I will make a new character. I've had dungeon masters say this to me, and I've said, no, I will make a new character. It happens a lot. Occasionally, you'll have players who will say, Thank you. I will continue with that character because I like that character. But it doesn't actually happen that often, surprisingly, at my table. It happens very, very few times. The only time it tends to happen is when the players are playing with reincarnation. And reincarnation has a lot of problems that is associated to using that spell. You bring the character back, you've only got part of the body, and they wind up a different race. And it does present a lot of problems in sort of rebuilding the character. And it can be somewhat amusing. And I think a lot of the time players view it that way. So I don't worry about fudging dice anymore. I don't really worry about that sort of stuff because I'm not worried about the characters dying. Because, we will proceed with the game, that my players will not leave the game because they're unhappy, because I will resolve it in a way that they are happy with. So I don't have to worry about that. I'm not worried about that sort of stuff. I'll leave that alone, okay? As for wandering monsters, the wandering monsters that I normally present to my players are not random monster charts. They're not big charts. They are very, very select. If I had a wandering monster in any of these locations, so something like the Cragmore hideout, it would be a goblin. It would be a group of goblins. It would probably be 2. That would be my wandering monsters. That would break their rest, okay? That's going to break up their short rest because they're going to have a fight, and that's it. End of story. So then they're going to restart the short rest, which means, again, a couple more goblins show up, okay? I'm not trying to tax them with the wandering monster. If I was dealing with something like the Red Brand hideout, I would probably use Red Brands. I would probably have 2 or 3 Red Brands who are patrolling that location. If I had, say, Cragmore Castle, I would probably use a couple of goblins, or 2 goblins and a bugbear. And they would be the patrol around that location as a wandering monster. If I was dealing with a lot of these, Coneyberry and the Banshee, I would probably use ghosts. If I didn't use a ghost because there's a banshee there, I might use wild animals. An owlbear would be a good example. That breaks the short rest. It's a wandering monster, not necessarily going to tax them too much. I can use anything from a wild boar. Okay, it doesn't need to be very much to actually break up their rest. Wyvern-Tor, I would probably use orcs. 2 or 3 orcs would probably be my go-to, and that's not going to be too taxing. Something like the Ruins of Thunder Tree, I would probably use twig blights. Not very taxing, just a couple of them, and that would be it. What else is there? Old Owl Well, I would probably use a couple of zombies. That's it. A wandering monster is not really supposed to be a challenge as such. It is just to really present the fact that there is a possibility that a patrol or something is in that location that might disturb your rest. Does that make sense? And I do dislike the wording "punish the players" for taking a rest unprepared. Now, if you don't rest and you should have rested, and you wander into a location that has wandering monsters or a set piece, then I don't think you should necessarily change that as well. Okay? Now, my approach when I'm running the game for experienced players and beginner players is very different. Okay? So when I'm talking about this stuff, I am talking about what I would do as an experienced dungeon master with experienced players. I would probably not use that many or that tough a fight in terms of wandering monsters with a new group of players. Okay, I would probably be a lot less. I wouldn't put quite so much stress on them. That's just my approach. And Fred Hubbard makes a good point. Random encounters may or may not interfere with the rest. That's entirely true. It is entirely possible that it might be just a conversation between patrolling wandering monsters or a random encounter. Okay, there doesn't necessarily need to be a fight, and that's not a bad thing if they manage to resolve the issue without having a battle. for those of you who are wondering, well, hang on, okay, if they can resolve it without using magic and swords, that's great, cool. Chuckles Doc, how's it going, Chuckles Doc? Hi Fred, what do you got here? Can the player detect a doppelganger in a social interaction? How would you do that though? Considering the doppelganger can read minds and is physically a perfect copy of someone. Really, I think the only way that the players could detect that there is a doppelganger involved is if they are familiar with the individual that the doppelganger has copied. So, copying somebody like Gundren Rockseeker, the group should be very familiar with Gundren Rockseeker. The adventure actually states that the players' characters are friends, and you should be setting your players up that way, okay? They should be friends with Gundren. So, detecting that, Gundren is actually a doppelganger, that is definitely possible. But it doesn't mean that the doppelganger can't get away with a whole lot of stuff before that happens. Somebody like Sildar Hallwinter, the adventuring group or your players' characters probably would not know Sildar Hallwinter that well. So it's much more likely that if Sildar Hallwinter was replaced with a doppelganger, which is probably not going to happen because there's no doppelgangers in that location, that they would not notice that. But if you were to do something like that, that's what I'm saying. Somebody like Nundro, I don't believe that the party know Nundro Rockseeker that well. So the doppelganger will probably be much more successful with the player's characters when it comes to impersonating Nundro Rockseeker compared to Gundren Rockseeker. I'm hoping that answers your question. If it does, good. All right. Noble, how's it going, Noble? My honest opinion, it depends. What does the doppelganger do to avoid detection? Would an opposed deception check work? Doppelganger deceive versus player's insight. So here's the thing. I don't think you necessarily want to just rely on the dice alone. As a new dungeon master, it would make sense to rely on the dice more rather than less, because it alleviates a lot of the stress that you might have in terms of figuring out how that will work. But intermediate and experienced dungeon masters will be looking for key things for the players to say and do that would reveal the doppelganger, or give them the chance of revealing the doppelganger. Okay? Often what I will do when I am playing a character that has been playing a doppelganger that's impersonating somebody else, is if the player can figure it out, then the character figures it out. For me, that is the simplest way to approach it, okay? But you don't have to do it that way. You can just roll dice if you want to, based on whatever triggers you want to use. Okay, and your trigger might be as simple as they're suspicious of the NPC. All right. Podsy, hi guys. Ever use Kobold Fight Club? Yes, I have used Kobold Fight Club on many occasions. It's a nice tool to set up the level of an encounter. It's all right. It's all right, and frankly, the thing with something like that is it's all right, I would say, between level 1 and 4, but beyond level 5, it really is a waste of your time. Okay, it really won't give you what you need. And if you have a group that is 6 or more players, you probably will find that the maths will not work. You will also find that if you have a group that is probably less than 4 players, or definitely less than 3 players, then you are in trouble, because it is still not going to work. And there are so many supplements out now that change how the player's character works, such as Tasha's. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything changes the balance of power a lot in terms of monsters and characters. And multi-classing, feats change all of that. Xanathar's Guide to Everything changes all of that. Elven Accuracy is stupidly powerful. Gloomstalkers, built right, unbelievable. Paladins, outrageous. And all wizards are overpowered, deliberately, designed as such. So, hence why I say the adventuring day is not necessarily going to work very well for you. And, Kobold Fight Club may be somewhere to start, but after a while, it's really more of an art. Okay, next. Overboard DM. Now, Overboard DM, that's Joe. Joe has his own YouTube channel. He goes over miniatures, terrain, and he does some reviews on different products. I suggest you go and check out his channel. He does a lot of stuff on topics that most people don't do on YouTube. You don't usually see his sort of stuff on YouTube, which is good. How's it going, Joe? Okay, players want to take rests every 5 minutes if I let them. Yeah, my players want to do the same thing, frankly, and I just don't fight it anymore. It's just an extra stress for myself. If I want the fight to be hard, I'll just make it harder. It's the easiest way to go. In fact, right now, and if any of my players are watching, hopefully they haven't figured it out, but right now they are level 8. They are in the second level of Undermountain. This is Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And if they come up with an alternative to fighting, I am much more open to them being successful in doing that. They've already tried to construct a goblin army. That didn't work out that well, but it was amusing. That certainly eliminated a lot of the goblin battles, which they would have pumped through anyway, whether they had rested or not. And so, it changes the game if you don't view it as just combat. Steer away from that a little bit, You don't have to just keep doing that. Yeah. So I don't fight the propensity of a player to want to long rest every single time they have had a combat. They won't always do that. You'll find at higher levels they will stop doing that to a certain degree. Okay, Chuckles. You're welcome, Chuckles, by the way. Right, I'm almost run out of water. Right, Kevin, what do you got here? Hi, Fred. Thanks for the great content. Any creative ideas for using the Tresendar Manor ruins? I was thinking a few red brands could be camped out there. Maybe it could also be renovated by the players. Kevin, very good question. I'm smiling, Kevin, because this is exactly what's happening right now in my own campaign. Okay, so to give you an idea of what is happening in my own campaign, I ran Dragon of Ice by a Peak, and then we transitioned into Dungeon of the Mad Mage. My players had the deed to the land of, around Tresendar Manor. And they also owned Tresendar Manor, or what's left of it, as well. They have decided to do renovations on it. As a result of wanting to do those renovations, they've put 10,000 gold pieces down on doing the renovations. I believe I was going to charge them 20,000 gold pieces and a certain number of days. And if I pull up Facebook, I might be able to find the details around that. So my players are actually doing that right now. And yes, you could have red brands camped outside of the the cellar area. That's certainly an option. So I'm actually doing this with my group right now. They also have Icespire Hold. So they have the fortress as well. They could use the fortress for other things if they wanted to. They are holding off on doing that. They've decided that Tresendar Manor is probably more useful to them. But my players are definitely intending to do far more with the manor. So here we go. Here's my details on Tresendar Manor, because I did some calculations around it. I calculated that it was 20,000 gold pieces in cost to actually rebuild Tresendar Manor, and 125 days to complete the repairs and build it back out. Okay, they have already put down 10,000 gold pieces, and I think they have completed. Yes, Jean Paul has marked down here that there have been 40 days of construction time so far. So we are recording that on our secret Facebook group, and we'll keep doing that. And they actually have the money right now to do all of the construction, but they decided to hold out since, They weren't at a point where construction would end. So they are going to have their own mana very, very shortly. How's that for answering your question? I thought that was a pretty good answer. You'll let me know, Kevin, if it wasn't a good enough answer. Okay, another drink of water. What do you got here, Noble? I recommend giving it to the players as a base, or they get a bonus reward for turning it over to the town after clearing out the red brands. Well, so here's the thing. If they capture it and it's not, they don't get it as part of your campaign as a deed, you could just hand it over to them as a reward, because nobody's going to rebuild it. It's a very costly process to rebuild a manor. Does that make sense? So rebuilding a manor is actually a costly process, as you can already tell. I also did the calculations for rebuilding Icespire Hold. I don't know if I could find that anytime fast, considering how big the group is, or how many posts we have now. But if I ever do find it, then maybe I'll cover that. I think it's much more likely to get covered in a future video once I've sort of played it all out, rather than it be presented here. But these are things you could absolutely do, and I think that's good advice. Okay. So question, Brian Lee, you've got a question. I have sometimes seen some players using metal dice instead of plastic dice. Is there any advantage to that? No, there's not. Frankly, you'll find that metal dice will probably, they'll last longer. They will damage the surface they roll on. They are usually much harder to manufacture, so they roll in a way that's balanced and fair. So for them to actually roll truly random, you can get unbalanced dice. I've done videos on checking that, but you can't check the balance on a metal dice. Okay, metal dice sets, you can't check them. You can only really check wooden dice, plastic dice. You can't check glass dice. Yes, there is such a thing as glass dice. D&D WoW has just released, or a couple of months ago, released some glass dice and sent them to me. They are amazing. It's like holding Cinderella's slipper in your hand. But I would be terrified of dropping them on the ground. Plastic dice that you can see through are better. Okay, transparent dice are better because you can see the imperfections inside. They're much more likely to be accurate. So if they're rolling plastic dice that are transparent, they're probably better. If they're rolling metal dice, they're going to wind up getting odd results. Some of those dice might be, roll up very low, or some of them might roll up very high, depending on what was going on and how it was constructed. There are a lot of companies that swear that their dice are balanced, but metal dice are just one of those things that's very hard to actually check. All right. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. All right, Nick, what do you got here? If they want it to be hard, I'll make it hard. Yes. Yeah. If they don't want it to be hard in the beginners, then don't make it hard. You don't need to make everything hard. Not everything they do needs to be hard. Anyway, Overboard Den. What do you got here, Joe? So happy you're running the Mad Mage. Can't wait to hear your take on it. So far, I will do a video, Joe, on it. So far, I have found the first level, because I've run Undermountain before. I found the first level not very satisfying. I made some changes. I scared my players big time. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but I'm going to have to make changes to the second level as well. It's a different way of playing the game when you're playing in a dungeon, which literally is a dungeon. I am presenting it as, although they're going deeper and deeper, the environment they're in and the plane of travel that's going to occur and the plane of travel that is occurring is going to grow and expand. So just because they go through a door does not mean that door leads into another room on the same level or further down. it may take them to a completely different world. That's the nature of Undermountain, and there's a lot of different portals in that adventure. Okay, right. So when the dice companies approach me and want me to do dice reviews, I always ask them, do you have plastic transparent dice that have cool colours in them? And if they say yes, then those are the dice I usually want to do reviews on, or do, instructional videos on. But that often doesn't seem to be the case. There's this big push for premium metal dice right now, and recently premium glass dice. All right, what else have we got here? You mean that the host is running it? Yeah, I'm running Dungeon of the Mad Mage right now, and you will probably get videos on that topic eventually, but I don't know when. It'll be a long time. Kevin, you like the answer? Great. Okay, if I answered the question well, good. Nick, your question. Here we go. Ran a bit of Halls of Undermountain. Yes, yep, during the 4E years. That's the one I did, yes. Any chance for a future Dungeon of the Mad Mage videos in the future? Yeah, well, actually there is. I actually started writing something, Nick, for, it's sort of a very brief overview of the first level and some of the things that I noticed. It's not sort of expansive because when I wrote the notes for that, it was designed for a shorts video, which is like less than a minute. I'm never going to do another shorts video. I just can't be bothered. Frankly, I think they've been painful, and so I am sticking to sitting under a tree at the beach or at the park, talking for a couple of minutes about a particular topic. These live streams and talking about it that way, I think it will definitely happen. I just don't know when. If you want to talk about Undermountain and 4E, I mean, certainly the Halls of Undermountain I could talk about because I've run it. But I don't know that necessarily it's going to happen too soon. I have had a discussion with AJ Pickett that we would do a collaboration with a discussion around Undermountain. He would do the lore, I would do the tactics, and I would provide a lot of pictures of miniatures, basically, in Undermountain. We haven't got to that point. I'm sure it will eventually happen, I just don't know when. Yeah, I personally, I prefer the plastic dice myself. I don't really like the metal dice that much. The truth of the matter is, I actually prefer the premium wooden dice that I got sent from Paladin Roleplay games. They sent me those dice, and they are the most amazing dice under the sun. But I could never afford to buy them because they're so expensive. so it's a bit of a moot point with regard to those dice. Okay, so I think I have answered everything I need to. I'm about to run out of water. My voice is going to give out. I hope people enjoy the video on the 5 deadly traps in Dungeons and Dragons, because it took me a long time to think about that. It's actually been in the works for a long time. For those of you who have got players who you want to sort of educate around when to rest and where to camp and do it so safely, I can assure you there's a video. It's edited. It is going to go up at some point. I am going to talk about the Dungeons and Dragons Adventuring Day at some point. There's a video. It's edited. It's ready to go up. I did that with Wally DM. I'm just toying with whether I really want to present it. That's just my thing. Okay. Okay. So let's do the. Oh, there it is. That's what we want. So hey, thank you to everybody. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you for showing up. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.